For 4 hours and 15 minutes now, we have been watching a sharply contentious hearing on Capitol Hill with Donald Trump's pick for defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, working to convince skeptical senators he's the right man to unite U.S. troops, even as Democrats accused him of denigrating female soldiers and trying to divide the military along political lines. Hegseth had spent weeks meeting with almost all Republican lawmakers to reassure them that allegations linked to his personal and professional past shouldn't be disqualifying. At one point, acknowledging to senators he is, quote, not a perfect person. But it was his views of women in the military that clearly struck a nerve with many senators, particularly women who are on that Armed Services Committee.
I have many concerns about your record and particularly your public statements, because they are so hurtful to the men and women who are currently serving in the U.S. military, harmful to morale, harmful to good order and discipline.
I'm quoting you from the podcast. Women shouldn't be in combat at all. Where is the reference to standards that they should be there if they can carry, if they can run? I don't see that at all, Mr. Hegseth.
What do you have to say to the almost 400,000 women who are serving today about your position on whether they should be capable to rise through the highest ranks of our military?
Senator, I would say I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, men and women, black, white, all backgrounds, with a shared purpose. Our differences are not what define us. Our unity and our shared purpose is what define us.
And it was this exchange with Democratic Senator Tim Kaine that laid bare the concerns some have with Hegseth's personal past, not just allegations of sexual misconduct, which he denies, but questions about whether he had issues with alcohol and extramarital affairs, and whether that speaks to a larger issue about his character and judgment.
Many of your work colleagues have said that you show up for work under the influence of alcohol or drunk. I know you've denied that, but you would agree with me, right, that if that was the case, that would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense.
Senator, those are all anonymous false claims, and the totality
they're not anonymous.
The letters on the record here.
They're not anonymous.
On the record,
we've seen records with names attached to them. You've admitted that it was consensual, and you were still married, and you just had a child by another woman.
Again,
how do you explain your judgment?
Completely false charges against me.
You
fully investigated, and I was completely clear.
You have admitted that you had sex while you were married to wife 2 after you just had fathered a child by wife 3. You've admitted that.
I want to bring in NBC senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake on Capitol Hill. Also with me, retired Army 4-star General Barry McCaffrey, who's also an MSNBC military analyst. Former Democratic Senator of Missouri, Claire McCaskill, an MSNBC political analyst. And Elise Jordan, former White House and State Department aide under President George W. Bush. She is also an MSNBC political analyst and is working on a book about women serving in overseas combat zones during World War II. Lots to get to. Garrett, let me do the big picture first. What stood out to you so far? Obviously, an extraordinarily high stakes hearing today. Did we hear anything that would change the minds of any of those senators who may have been on the fence?
The request specifically.
Yeah, and Chris, and with apologies, I'm standing just outside the door through which we think Pete Hegseth will exit in a few minutes. So if I've got my head on a swivel here a little bit, that's why. You played that Tim Kaine exchange, which to me really was the pivotal exchange in this hearing. And it came, I believe, 11 senators in, more than an hour into this hearing, before I think Democrats finally got their arms around how to go after Pete Hegseth, or how to at least try to expose some of the issues about his personal conduct and his background that would be the things that would make Republicans and Republican senators uncomfortable enough with him not to vote for him. Because at the end of the day, that is really the audience. If Democrats think that they can prevent Pete Hegseth from becoming Secretary of Defense, they have to do it by convincing Republican senators not to support him. And I think it's those personal qualifications, characteristics, things in his past that are far more likely to be damaging to him than his policy positions, with which most Republicans largely agree. Mark Kelly took another bite at the apple later in the hearing, I think was similarly effective. Take a listen to this moment.
On Memorial Day 2014, at a CVA event in Virginia, you needed to be carried out of the event for being intoxicated.
Senator, anonymous smears.
Just true or false? Very simple. Summer of 2014 in Cleveland, drunk in public with the CVA team.
Anonymous smears.
I'm just asking for true or false answers. An event in North Carolina, drunk in front of 3 young female staff members after you had instituted a no alcohol policy and then reversed it. True or false?
Anonymous smears.
Back and forth with Pete Hegseth. He brought up.
It's obviously Hegseth there refusing to engage with the structure of Mark Kelly's questions, but it is those questions that I think could leave a bad taste in the mouth of some Republican lawmakers. But if you're looking for a cue from this hearing, look no further than Joni Ernst, who had been publicly skeptical of Pete Hegseth before this hearing, had 2 private meetings with him. Her questions were largely friendly, and she introduced into the record a letter supportive of Hegseth. If she's a no vote on him whenever this nomination gets to the floor, she certainly disguised it well. Chris.
All right, if you're able to get Pete Hegseth, we'll come back to you. Thank you for that. Senator, look, you've been through hearings before. So, look, beyond the politics of this, there's a huge, as I said, the stakes in this are huge to head the Defense Department. But if you're one of those senators who has indicated or may have been on the fence, Joni Ernst obviously was an obvious one. People were looking to see how she would do because of the accusations of sexual misconduct and his statements on women in the military. But if you're wondering how your constituents are viewing this, did Pete Hegseth help or hurt himself?
Well, I mean, I think we have to acknowledge he's a good communicator. That's what he does for a living. That's frankly what his career has really been focused on for most of the last decade is public communication. And so on that score, I think he did a good job. But there's a couple of things that really matter here. The first is, let's just for a minute do a thought exercise. Imagine if somebody with this profile, a history of problems running small organizations, no background running large organizations, someone who has said incendiary things about women and others in public repeatedly, someone who has a history of people speaking out with names associated, by the way, about public drunkenness, someone who clearly has been accused of serious misbehavior when his lawyer even admitted he was inebriated, but it was consensual. Does anybody think a Republican would vote for that profile if it was nominated by a Democrat? There wouldn't be a single vote for Pete Hegseth if this was a nominee to be Secretary of Defense by a Democratic president. The other thing I want to point out at the very beginning is a very depressing fact, Chris, and that is the Armed Services Committee that I served on for 12 years was an oasis of bipartisanship. It was a place where Republicans and Democrats, when we do votes on markups, it wouldn't be by party, almost never by party. It would be by issue. It would be by how you viewed a certain program or a certain weapon system. It would never be by party. This person, for the very first time in the history of the Armed Services Committee, refused to meet with Democratic senators before the nomination confirmation hearing. That's just mind-boggling. The Democrats didn't get the FBI report. They weren't allowed to see it. They weren't allowed to get any of the other forensic information. The only person who got to see any of this was the chairman of the committee. That's never happened before. They are asking for this to be a partisan military by the way they've conducted this confirmation process. And that is very depressing.
Well, let's talk about the view that he expressed, General, if I can, about the military as it stands today. Some of the things that Pete Hegseth said is that he wants to clean up the mess that is the Pentagon right now. He wants to figure out how we bring pride back to wearing the uniform, the implication being that the members of the military now are not proud to wear the uniform. He wants patriotic pro-America leadership. Again, the implication being that right now the people who are in charge of the Pentagon are neither patriotic nor pro-American. And an awful lot of attacks, both by Pete Hegseth and Republican members of the committee, on what they call both woke ideology and woke training. DEI got a lot of attention today. I wonder how you see the view that we heard today from Republicans and, more to the point, from Pete Hegseth about the U.S. military right now.
Well, look, I think the single most important statement about this nominee's sort of troubled past came in the opening statement by Senator Jack Reed, the military veteran himself, been around the Senate a long time, very reasonable, very objective, and it surfaced all the reasons why you could or should vote against this nomination. And it's a provocative nomination. By the way, not half as provocative as the incoming commander-in-chief. Now, having said that, look, this guy's Princeton educated, he's smart, he's articulate, he does know a ton about national security issues as a commentator on TV, and he conducted himself very well in this 4-hour-plus hearing. I think to the point where all he needed was to lose one Republican senator, and it would be killed in committee. And I think a lot of Republican senators probably hoped that would happen. It didn't happen. This guy's going to get confirmed. And I think it was a very divisive, bitter, he's walking away from his background on women in the armed forces. They're 15% of the armed forces. 1,000 have been killed and wounded in combat. He knows he has to walk away from that. And he doesn't have a very good accounting on alcohol abuse. We cannot have a Secretary of Defense that has an alcohol problem at 2 o'clock in the morning. So mixed results, but I think this guy's going to get confirmed.